Different species have a different color speculum, the bright feather on the side, which provides a clearly visible signal to keep the flock together during flight. The temperature can plummet to minus 15 degrees centigrade. Winter is a lonely time in the Freedom Village. Many older villages have only fire and warmth for company during the long nights. Most of the young people have gone to Seoul, the capital, just over 44 kilometers to the south of the buffer zone. Seoul seems attractive today, but in 1950, all hell broke loose there. Just 5 years after the end of World War II, North and South Korea went to war. The Cold War had inflamed differences between the Communist North and the Democratic South, with each claiming to be the legitimate government of the Korean Peninsula. Without warning, the North invaded. During the next 3 years, 2 million people were killed, most of them civilians. North Koreans fled their homes in panic, and 10 million families were torn apart. In 1953, the two governments finally met inside an old building in the original Truce village at Panmunjom. The war was not over, merely suspended under armistice. They agreed to reinforce the border around the 38th parallel. And so the DMZ was born. Soon the area bristled with military personnel, mines, and wire. The animals and plants within suddenly became some of the most heavily protected in the world. The Korean War made what was once seen as a temporary divide irrevocable, and relations between the two Koreas went into deep freeze. In other Cold War states, such as East Germany, the situation began to change. But on the Korean Peninsula, time stood still. The people of Freedom Village struggled to preserve their way of life under strict curfew. Traditional skills like fish drying have sustained them through many bitter winters. By January, heavy snowfall cuts the village off completely. For the animals, life depends on death. Food is scarce, and scavengers are forced to feed closely together. Magpies rub shoulders with their close kin, carrion crows. The two guards have only each other for company. But a few years ago, they discovered a most unusual way to relieve the boredom. And it was the family living further down the hillside that first gave them the idea. The guards realized that the DMZ animals also found winter very difficult. For the wild boars, the thick carpet of snow makes foraging for roots, bulbs, and tubers extremely difficult, in spite of their superb sense of smell. The guards wondered if they could do anything to help. Boars can also hear extremely well, and the matriarch flees at the slightest sound of danger, even though it comes from the other side of the fence, and leads her family, or sounder, deeper into the oak and pine forest. The boars travel in single file, the matriarch at the front, like foot soldiers following the path trodden flat by the feet in front. Female boars always live together. Male piglets stay with the sounder until they reach maturity at around 7 months, at which point they'll leave and live alone. At this time of the year, late autumn and early winter, the males begin to gather close to female groups. The largest male in the area sharpens his impressive tusks against the branches of a bush, a signal to the other males that he is boss. The 4 enlarged canine teeth are much larger in the males than the females. During the rut, they become highly aggressive and dangerous, engaging in fearsome battles, impressive displays of their awesome strength. When fighting, the boars stand shoulder to shoulder, thrusting their tusks against one another's sides. They have thickened skin around their necks, so serious injuries are rare. But for the sows, it's wise to stay out of the way of these hormone-enraged monsters. Staying with the sounder is no guarantee of safety. The scar on the matriarch's flank probably came from being trapped in discarded wire. As well as burying food, the snow also causes other problems. It makes the forest slopes particularly treacherous because hidden rocks can break an animal's leg. The roe deer must tread carefully. Roe deer mate in summer, but the females exhibit a phenomenon called delayed implantation. Their embryos won't grow until the following spring. The guards, meanwhile, had decided to make more work for themselves, work that had nothing to do with patrolling the DMZ. And right next to the 3-meter fence that separates no man's land from South Korea, the shy roe deer wait patiently. Back in the forest, the matriarch's sensitive nose detects something strange. Many years ago, bored sentry guards began to throw scraps of food over the fence, just to see how the animals would react. At the time, the soldiers were simply trying to relieve the monotony of their work. The animals soon learned to come to the fence for feeding. For some, the handouts were free, but others paid a heavy price. The roe deer is just inches from a claymore mine, one of many in the DMZ. If the mine explodes, hundreds of steel balls will burst out in a 60-degree arc, killing the deer and every other animal within a radius of 100 meters. But in these hard times, it's worth the risk. Thankfully, accidents are fairly rare. Gradually, the guards tempted out even the most secretive forest animals, including the rare gorals. Creatures they'd probably never seen before, at least not this close up. The extra food may even have contributed to the survival of the last few gorals in the world. When the government came to hear of this activity, it realized that the guards were helping to protect the country's precious wildlife heritage. Now, the district office provides leaves, sweet potatoes, and carrots every day. Feeding the animals has been added to the list of the guards' daily duties. The goral comes from an ancient lineage. Its ancestors evolved into 2 groups, the antelopes on one side and the sheep and goats on the other. By feeding them, the guards help preserve a biological wonder. As well as giving the goral a helping hand, the guards also put it at great risk by coaxing it so close to the border. Another lethal claymore mine is lodged in the fence. For the wildlife, life in the DMZ is a mixed blessing. The guards search for the boars, but the matriarch keeps her group higher up on the slopes, where they forage for food from the forest menu. Boars could never be accused of being fussy eaters. From roots, tubers, acorns, and shrubs to worms, insects, mice, and eggs, they'll eat just about anything. The matriarch's snout scans the ground, picking up scents from beneath the snow. She uses the fleshy, mobile disc at the tip to root out anything edible. The matriarch hasn't refused the offer of free food. She knows that her turn will come. Much as they enjoy feeding the animals, the guards can't neglect their other duties. They regularly check stones balanced in the wire fence. If any have fallen out, it might mean that someone has tried to get through the fence. But the only sign of life is the goral, searching for the last few scraps of food. The free meal is over, for today at least. The guards, though, haven't finished their feeding rounds. They have one more family to attend to. A family that will happily accept the feast of leftovers and scraps that other animals won't touch. Size-wise, there's little difference between the adult females and last year's piglets. But the younger boars have got a more reddish coat and seem the keenest to get there and fill their bellies. After the effort of rooting through deep snow for tiny morsels to eat, the boars relish the chance just to pig out. One youngster takes a few minutes longer to join his siblings. Recently, this young male stepped on a mine. He was lucky to lose just his leg. Most would have lost their life. But this safe haven can turn into a death trap. The DMZ accidentally kills some of the small lives it so successfully protects. He seems to cope very well with his war wound, even though it slows him down. When the matriarch decides to move on, her three-legged son brings up the rear, just like he always does. In winter, boars keep warm thanks to a double-layered coat. Thick bristles on the outside protect a softer blanket of insulating fluff below. And an unseen boar is warmer than all inside its mother's body. The matriarch is pregnant again. The water deer's coat has hollow hairs for extra insulation. Modern deer have antlers, but not the more primitive water deer. Instead, his canine teeth grow out to form two magnificent multi-purpose tusks. Here, they're angled backwards for grazing. But should water deer need a fighting tool, he can rotate the tusks towards the front, like tiny daggers, for use on a rival male, not on his boar neighbors. While the Korean peninsula remained paralyzed under the long shadow cast by the Cold War, elsewhere, massive political progress shook the world. In 1989, the Berlin Wall dividing East and West Germany came down. South Korea's leader of the opposition, Kim Dae-jung, took a particular interest in Germany's reunification process. For years, he'd nurtured a dream of seeing the same thing happen in his homeland. And he promised his supporters that if he ever became president, he would work towards reunification in Korea. He called his ideas the Sunshine Policy. Current government policies suit the people of Freedom Village just fine. Each family farms 5.8 hectares of land, mostly rice paddies and ginseng, bringing in about $82,000 a year tax-free. But no amount of income can make the winters any easier to cope with. As the weather closes in, they concentrate on looking after their domestic animals. Though they still mostly use traditional skills to survive winter in the buffer zone, the villagers also have some modern machinery. A mulcher proves invaluable. Shredded wood will provide food for cattle until the grass grows back in spring. Like the guards who feed the animals in the DMZ, the villagers also remember their wild neighbors. From time to time, farmers get rid of old domestic fowl to make room for new, more productive birds. But the old hens don't go to waste. Volunteers collect the carcasses and donate them to nature. In spite of their own hardships, they never neglect the local wildlife, even the most familiar creatures. And like the more endangered wildlife within the DMZ, the magpies and crows in the buffer zone know where to come for their free meals. Both species are intelligent, bold, and highly evolved. They can adapt quickly to changes in their surroundings and soon learn to exploit any new opportunity. Flexibility of behavior is a highly successful survival strategy. All this activity attracts the attention of other hungry carrion eaters, black vultures. Normally solitary, they congregate in large numbers when there's a rumor of food. The news spreads as vultures far and wide see those circling above and cruise in on vast 2.5-meter wingspans to check things out for themselves. Apart from a little toupee of feathers, their heads and faces are bald. If the carcass were fresh, sticky blood would make a horrible mess of feathers, so the vultures stick with smooth facial skin. They spread their wings to form a protective mantle wide over the food and hide it from thieves. To hold the meat in place, they grip it with their feet, which lack the strength of an eagle's talons. In many cultures, vultures are considered dirty and lowly. Here, usually, they enjoy the same respect as eagles. Despite its impressive size, this unfortunate individual finds itself harassed by crows and magpies. Then bullied by another vulture. And finally, pestered by a crow. The crow may be showing off its strength to another crow, as magpies are known to do to one another. If a vulture won't take the bait, there are plenty of other crows to annoy, particularly those that have got a beak full of something worth fighting for. Though the policy on the ground is each for themselves, the crows and magpies will cooperate in the face of a common enemy. A buzzard that dared to fly too near finds itself viciously mobbed. Mobbing may help adolescent magpies learn which predators pose the greatest threat. In 1997, far away from the hostility of the DMZ, Kim Jae-jung was finally elected, and he soon suggested direct talks with North Korea in the name of reconciliation. Kim Dae-jung flew to North Korea, where Chairman Kim Jong-il met him in person. After 55 years of enmity between their nations, the two leaders pledged to work together for peace. It was a momentous occasion. Back in the DMZ, the countryside finally begins to shake off its snowy blanket. By April, winter is well and truly over. The endless dripping signals the arrival of